Greetings. My name is Elaine Miller-Karras, and I am the co-founder of the Trauma Resource Institute and one of the key developers of the Community Resiliency Model that I will be sharing with you today. The Community Resiliency Model came out of the work that I and others did, not only post-disaster, but also working with individuals who were coming into primary healthcare clinics who sometimes were experiencing great suffering. So I'm going to start out by talking a little bit about what the Community Resiliency Model is, and hopefully help you have a greater understanding of how you might use some of the concepts and the skills of the model to promote greater mind and body health. So the Community Resiliency Model, what exactly is it? It's a set of 6 wellness skills that can be used across the lifespan. It can be used across cultures and people that have different abilities, whether they might be hearing impaired, maybe they are a paraplegic, but individuals in all different ways and that they are as human beings can learn the skills of the model to help them have a greater sense of embodied well-being in mind, body, and spirit. So I'm going to start out by asking you 3 questions. What or who uplifts you? What or who gives you strength? What or who helps you get through hard times? And just for a moment, ponder and reflect upon the answers to one or all 3 of those questions. And as you do so, I'm going to invite you to kind of give more detail about whatever may be reflected upon. And I'm going to give you an example for me. What uplifts me is my granddaughter. Her name is Madison. She's spunky and she's adorable, of course. And has a sense of humor. She's a wonderful little artist. And when I'm with her, and just even thinking about her in this moment, I'm sensing a really an amazing sense of warmth in my heart and a kind of a sense of well-being that starts really in my head and goes all the way to my toes. So I would call that embodied well-being. And many of us have these kinds of resources in our life that we can call up that actually help cultivate the well-being on the inside. And we'll be talking more about that when we talk about some of the skills of the Community Resiliency Model as we go through this introduction. So what does the word resiliency mean? It can be overused, even people say weaponized at times. I've asked the question, what does resiliency mean to you? To really, at this point, probably thousands of people. And I'm going to ask you to reflect upon that for a moment. What does it mean to you? And this is a sharing of what we have come to within the Trauma Resource Institute of the different components of what resiliency means. And the first is to have a compassionate heart, to have an empathic stance, that when you do that and you come forward either as an individual towards your family, towards your community, that we can also acknowledge what our individual and collective assets and strengths are. But that's only part of the aspect of resiliency. It also is acknowledging our individual and collective suffering, not only present day, but historical. And that we can lean into the suffering, but also lean into the remembering of those assets and strengths. So we would say that we're a strength-based intervention that can lead to greater well-being. And when we do that, we can have this sense that that's embodied well-being that then has this remarkable way of making us more solution-focused as we're looking at the problems that face us as individuals and communities and as families. And then there can be this etching of optimism and hope that is really quite remarkable that I've seen all over the world, even after the most incredible suffering. And we are doing a project right now with the Ukrainian EdCamp. And this is a group of people, 40,000 teachers in Ukraine. And we've been meeting with them since the beginning of the war, providing this information to them and also the skills. I met with them this morning, for example. But what I want to share with you about them is I'm recalling one of the participants in the group. Her name is Anna. And Anya says, oh, I am resilient. And it's making me recall the suffering of the past. My grandparents lived through World War I. My parents through World War II, I never thought I would live through a war, but here I am, and I have a teenage daughter. We as Ukrainians have very strong DNA, and I know that is going to help me survive, and my daughter will recollect these times to her children. Now, this is not something that I asked her to say. This came up spontaneously when she could experience that embodied well-being. And that is the optimism and hopeful thinking that I've seen in many places in the world. And also when people start thinking in this way, they integrate this kind of thinking and being into their activities of daily living. That then means that's cultivating that well-being as they go through their days, their weeks, their months, their years. So the key concepts of the model, there's something called the resilience zone, the OK zone. My mother was from El Salvador, so she would have called it la zona de bienestar. And this is your vitality. This is when you're in your resilient zone, it's not the calm zone, although you can be calm in it, but you could also be angry, you could be sad. But you can manage, not only manage, but thrive as you experience the full range of emotions and thoughts that we feel as human beings. And even though they can be difficult at times and unpleasant, it is something that you can live with and actually learn from. So this is the resilient zone. And this is the next illustration gives you some images of children and different feelings that these children have when they're in that zone. And I'm going to point out angry because people say, well, can you be angry and be in your zone of well-being? Yes, you can. I've seen some very passionate, angry people that have used that anger, which is a very common and normal human feeling, not to cause harm to themselves and others, but sometimes to create organizations that help to advocate and change the world because maybe of an injustice. So it's important to know that even passion, which comes from the root word passos, to suffer, can also be part of that zone of well-being. But naturally, we're not always in a zone of well-being. So this is showing you an illustration. And sometimes there are the thunderbolts of life that can represent traumatic or stressful events or reminders of those events. That so instead of being in that wave of the resilient zone, that rhythm of life, where you're kind of showing up as your best in your mind, body, and spirit, you can get stuck in either the high zone or the low zone. And the high zone is edgy, irritable. You may have pain in your body. You may say things that you regret, and angry outbursts. And then the low zone can be depressed, sad, isolated. You don't want to talk to anybody. You're so fatigued and numb. You may have a hard time getting out of bed. And some people, so it's normal. It's a common thing. I've been in my high zone and my low zone. The problem is if you stay there. So you can get stuck in the high or low zone, and then that can become problematic. So this is a way that we kind of talk about the human experience. And so just think for a moment, have you yourself ever, like me, been in the high or low zone and also been in your zone of well-being or the OK zone, the resilient zone? And so most of us can say yes to that answer. And so remember, we're trying to describe the experience of being human in a way also that's not a negative, but just part of, let's explain what happens to us. And then what happens if we get stuck, and is there a way out? And those are some of the elements that I'll be talking about, because I'm going to share with you skills. I'm going to be sharing with you some different information that can help you get back into that resilient zone if you get bumped out and get stuck in the high or low zone. And this is showing you a free app that we have that's called iChill. We also have ichillapp.com if you don't have a smartphone. And it's so far in English and in Spanish, and it just was translated into Ukrainian. It's not quite up and going, but it should be by the time people listen to this. But we have them in these languages. So anytime, anywhere, people can pull their phone out and they can listen to the skills to help them get back into their resilient zone. So let's talk a little bit about the definitions of let's say, trauma and stress. So I'm using a terminology that comes out of a wonderful article that was written back in 2016 by a Dr. Bucci, and she talks about positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. So positive stress, we've all experienced this at times. Let's say we're going to do something like take a test, or maybe we have to have a difficult conversation with someone, and we can feel the energy kind of rising up and maybe our heart beating. And then the test is over or the conversation is done. We quickly return to a state of inner balance. But tolerable stress can be a time-limited stressor that results in short-acting changes within the body and the mind and feelings, but balance doesn't return so quickly. So maybe if this is happening to me, I might have to talk to my friend, or maybe have to go for a walk or do something a little bit more to get maybe a support from my system of support in order to return to balance. I need more interventions. But toxic stress happens to many of us, and it's happening to many of us around the world. And that's ongoing and relentless body responses to intense stressors. This causes a prolonged activation of our stress response systems in the absence of, let's say, protective relationships. And there's chemicals that are released in the body that are supposed to be for short acting, like cortisol, adrenaline. And they're just, it's like we have our foot on the accelerator of our nervous system, and we don't have a brake in order to be able to stop this unrelentless, intense experience of embodied stress. So it's important to know that this happens, and we know now too, if this happens when we're a child, that sometimes our foot gets very stuck on that accelerator of our nervous system, and it's hard to put the brake on. This can happen to us as adults as well. So toxic stress or trauma can be things that happen to us that are too much too fast. Let's say like war and shellings, or a car accident, or domestic violence, or too little for too long. And that can be poverty, food insecurity. It can be childhood neglect, and too much for too long could be certainly COVID-19, abuse, wars that go on for much too long. So you get to define what you would put into those three buckets, because basically these are some ideas of the things that happen to us as human beings. It's not an exhaustive list. Every single thing that happens to us is not on here, but you may look at this list and go, oh my goodness, yes, I remember that time when I was bullied when I was a child. Oh, and my father died. That certainly did cause much harm to me. And that car accident. But there's so many things. If you live in a country where there's colonialism, and know that that colonialism impacted your country. So these are all the different ways that some different experiences, but you get to categorize whether was this too much for too long, too little for too long, or was it like one of those shocks that happened that it came too fast that you didn't get to be able to respond to it in the way that you may have wanted to. So this is a quote from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. It says, nothing beautiful at the end comes without a measure of some pain, some frustration, some suffering. This is the nature of things, and this is how the universe has been made up. So joy burnished by the fire of adversity, suffering, and struggle is really what happens to us as human beings. And so, why I'm going to be presenting to you what we call a biological model. So toxic stress happens in the body. And so we can try to talk our way out of the toxic stress or express our feelings, but sometimes it's just not enough. And we know through a study that was done in the United States called the Adverse Child Experiences Study, where they looked at literally thousands of people in a healthcare system and found out that if they experienced 4 or more adverse child experiences, then they were prone to increased risk of mental illnesses, increased risk of developing diabetes, heart disease. So what happens to us as children can set up a reaction of this toxic stress with those chemicals pumping in the system, that there's not a brake. But the good news is that we can learn ways to put the brake on, and that's what some of these skills are so important that I'm going to share with you. But to know that there's adverse child experiences, but there's also positive ones. And this was a study that was done by Dr. Christina Bethel, that she and her colleagues suggest that people that have positive child experiences may have also lifelong experiences for helping to come back into that balance, even when they have co-occurring adversities, such as adverse child experiences. So there are many things that can mitigate. I'm not going to go through every single one, but having at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in you. If you felt safe and protected by an adult in your home, if the family stood by them during difficult times, if there was a sense of participating in community traditions. Now, you don't have to have all of these, but the reason why I mention them is many of you work in communities. And if you look at some of this information, how can you affect your family and your community if you know that there's a lot of adversity happening, which I know many people have, in order to reduce the chances that this will have a long lasting impact? So the researchers suggest that we need to not only look at adverse childhood experiences in terms of helping children and adults, but also what were some of the factors that may be safeguards for that child and for that adult? And if they're not there, how can we provide them now or create programs that might help us? So we, with this model, think that we're also providing a perspective shift, because conventional thinking is an assumption that says people are bad, just need to be punished. I know that in the United States, we have a prison system based on this concept. And what is wrong with you? Trauma informed, which we say this community resiliency model is an awareness that people are suffering, and we need to learn how trauma impacts a child and adult's development, just what we're learning right now about toxic stress. And the very important question, when we see somebody stuck in the high or low zone and they're exhibiting behaviors that we're concerned about, we can ask the question, well, what happened to them? You know, what happened to you as you're listening to this? But we've added this resiliency informed action. People are resilient based on the definition I talked about earlier. People need to learn how skills of well-being can be cultivated and how they can reduce suffering. And so then we can say, what is right about that person? What are their strengths? What is right about you? And what are your strengths in this moment? In the project that we have right now with Ukraine, we're asking these questions to people that are definitely suffering. And yet they're able to say, oh, well, I can cook this meal for my child, or I can call this person on the phone, or we're trying to contribute food to people that may not have the same resources that we have, that people are still engaged in their strengths, even though what's happening around them is very difficult. So this brings me to talking a little bit more about Ukraine, because I'm in the United States and Ukraine is thousands of miles away from my home. And yet I have met with Ukrainians for more days than not in the last 5 months. And so this is a paradigm shift. So I want you all to think that whatever you're doing in the world, and I think we need an array of different resources. Can this be delivered online? This is the first time in my experience of responding to disasters, and I've been to places after earthquakes, typhoons, mass shootings, that I've responded during the event. And my hope is, as we're meeting with people and giving them information about the nervous system, about skills, that it may help reduce the incidence of developing, let's say, post-traumatic stress conditions, because we're doing this now and giving these skills, not waiting till after the war is over. So I'm very impressed with EdCamp Ukraine in how they have been able to mobilize their community, not only of translators, of us and others, in order to be able to offer this. So as of June 10th, we had 67 meetings. The total live people that participated in these meetings were 30,000. And then the total amount of views has been almost 54,000. So altogether, more than 80,000 views of this offering. I have gone to many, many disasters. I would not have been able to affect 80,000 people, which is why we need to really look at this as a paradigm shift. So as we go forward with the community resiliency models, the things that I'm teaching to the Ukrainians and I teach to people all over the world is that the community resiliency model focuses on the biology of the human nervous system, and it's about biology versus mental weakness. There are common human reactions to stressful and traumatic events that affect the mind, the body, and the spirit. And if we can help people learn to tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being, to return to that resilient zone and cultivate their well-being, then that helps to expand their resilient zone and expand that sense of well-being. So when I've asked questions around the world, well, how are these factors that we talked about earlier affecting your thinking, your emotions, your physicality, your spirituality, your behaviors, your relationships, either in yourself or others, literally all over the world, regardless of which country I go to, people say the same things. And what I want to highlight here, I'm not going to name every single thing. These are the common reactions, is that people often don't realize that the physical reactions to stress and trauma are exactly because of the stress and trauma. So they may feel numb, physical pain, rapid heart rate, breathing problems, tight muscles, sleep problems, stomach upset. They may tremble and they think, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? I'm living through this terrible thing. And then I'm developing some kind of heart condition or something else, when actually it's connected to the traumatic or stressful experience. So I give you this information to help you all understand that trauma not only happens in emotions, but affects every realm of human behaviors. If we get stuck in that higher low zone for too long, sometimes people start drinking or start using drugs because it's so intolerable to be in that higher low zone for too long. They'll try to use anything to get out of it. So there are ways that we can use this very smart biology that we have inside of ourselves to return back to a state of well-being, which is what the community resiliency model is all about. But the other question we've asked is, have there been post-traumatic resiliency reactions? Some people call them post-traumatic stress, positive post-traumatic stress reactions. People have described the most amazing stories of resilience, like Anna from Ukraine, but they've talked about courage they didn't know they had. Sometimes renewed relationships, really understanding what is important and what's not, an increased appreciation of loved ones, gratitude, sometimes forgiveness, hope, faith, wisdom. And really interestingly to me is when people sense that well-being, even if the horrible things have happened to them by others, they say, I can have compassion for that person. And I can have compassion for myself, having lived through that. So new meanings emerge that I think is another way that we as human beings have been designed. And that brings me to the model is based on laws of nature. We have seasons, spring, winter, fall, summer, and we have seasons that happen inside of ourselves. We go through difficult times, and sometimes we can think, I am trapped by this pain of suffering or discomfort. But if we pay attention to our sensations of well-being, just like we have these seasons in the world, in our world, we also we can learn how to cultivate the well-being within inside of ourselves, no matter what season we're in, and that can transform our lived experiences. So the model is based on the scientific research about the brain. There's an amazing concept called neuroplasticity, which simply means the brain can change. And I have to tell you, this is a very hopeful part of us, no matter what we've experienced. If we start cultivating our well-being, we can actually have a greater sense of well-being and maybe even sense more hope and appreciation and even more gratitudes. And there's another term called neurogenesis, which is the ability to create new neurons or brain cells and connections between those neurons, those brain cells throughout a lifetime. So we have these networks that are constantly working for us. And it's interesting how they do that, because we know that the more we pay attention to our sensations of well-being, that brain cells that fire together, that link together, they become stronger. And that leads me to this concept of tuning and pruning. So tuning is the positive experiences that can change the actual structure of the brain by increasing the number of connections between the neurons and brain cells. And just like we're seeing a pathway, the more we use it, the more that it is really becoming stronger within us, right? That it's greater, it's not only sensed in a way that we can sense our well-being, but the more we cultivate it, the more that we can stay within that zone of well-being. But notice part of the pathway is disappearing, because there's another concept called pruning. And those are the connections between brain cells, or neural connections, that if they aren't used, they weaken and often disappear. It's called the use it or lose it principle. So that means that we've had such a negativity focus that actually can start to wane away. And we find that we're more into thinking about some of the ways being solution focused and more resiliency not only informed and focused in our approaches. So this is a very important concept to know about how we are designed. We also have this amazing anatomy and physiology. There's structures. Anatomy is the structure of our body parts and their relationships to one another. And the physiology is the study of the functions of the body. So in the community resiliency model, we use observation and knowledge of patterns of the nervous system to help people learn to distinguish between sensations of distress and well-being. And we also help people learn about the brake and the accelerator of the nervous system. The sympathetic prepares us for action. The heart rate goes up. There is the breathing becomes more rapid and shallow. And the stress hormones are being pumped in our system. So this is meant for action, right? If we have to get away from a threat. And our digestive juices will be diminished as well as the saliva. So those of us that get stuck in sympathetic hyperarousal that can get connected to the high zone, we sometimes have a dry mouth and have digestive problems. So it's important for us to learn how to access the brake of the nervous system, the parasympathetic. And like I said earlier, sometimes we just don't even know we have a brake. And so the skills of the community resiliency model are designed to help you learn how to put that brake on. And there's the slowing down of our heart rate, and our breathing becomes deeper, and we can feel those stress hormones leaving. We might even tremble a little bit and shake it out. And we can hear sometimes the digestive juices coming back on, and we actually have saliva in our mouth when we're activating the parasympathetic. So in this model, we're trying to help you discern those difference between when it's a distressing sympathetic hyperarousal connected to the high zone, or when you are getting calmer, getting into the parasympathetic, and preparing your body for rest. So when we talk about key concepts too, we talk about learning the community resiliency model. So the community resiliency model guide is a person who shares the wellness skills of the community resiliency model with others. So you might listen to the skills today and say, oh, I really like these skills that Elaine has taught us. I think I'm going to go teach them to my mother. So then you become a guide. Now you might need a little bit more work, and you've got the app, but we've noticed that people take our little workshops and they go, oh, I started using that right away, and I started feeling better. And the app was a way to reinforce this information for me. So the other aspect of the community resiliency models, I want to tell you about the 6 skills of the community resiliency model. There's tracking, there's resourcing, there's grounding, there's gesturing, shift and stay, and help now strategies. Now, I only have time to teach you a few of them today so that you can start to learn. And my computer has just been stuck for a little bit, so it's going to be a little bit before I can go forward, but I'm going to continue to talk. So with the first skill, with the skills, we are what we call non-directive, and we asked questions in an invitational way. So for example, we wouldn't say, close your eyes, I'm going to teach you a skill. We would say, you can leave your eyes open or closed, whichever is most comfortable for you. And that may mean you'll see some people with their eyes open, some people with their eyes closed, because we've learned, having done this really in many places around the world, for some of us, if we close our eyes, we actually can have a traumatic flashback. So that's not something, of course, that we would want to have someone experience. The other thing we might say is you can also, we don't direct breath. We wouldn't say, take a deep breath right now. For some of us, even paying attention to the breath without an image can make us get all jumbly inside and can actually be uncomfortable, can also take us to a time in our life where we may have experienced something where we had a traumatic experience. So we instead would say, for example, going back to those wellness skills that I talked about earlier, if you remember, let's say for me, your granddaughter, what do you notice on the inside? I have an image that I've already experienced that I then can bring back to remember. And then that's already something that I've experienced within my body. And when that happens, I can experience that zone of well-being and have that sense of, I feel I can sense that breath, but it's a noticing of the breath. It's not directing the breath. So now I'm going to go to the next slide, and I think it's working again. And I am going to talk about tracking. But before I do that, I'm going to go back one and show you, you have all the skills of the model in the palm of your hand. So as you can see, the skills I mentioned are all there, and tracking is at its base. And I'm going to talk first about tracking. And tracking is the foundation to help you stabilize your nervous system. And this is about paying attention, because what we pay attention to grows, like I've already stated. So this was a study that was done in Finland. And what's important to me about this study is that every thought, feeling has the corresponding sensation in the body. Sensation, so a sensation is a physical body experience, and it originates in billions of receptors that are distributed every part of our body. And look, and I just want to point out a couple. For example, look at the anger. There's a lot of, so people colored the brighter colors when they sensed more activation in their body, and the darker colors is when they didn't feel, either it felt not very much activation or none at all. So if a person was angry, notice the hands. And many times when people are angry, they might strike out with their hands, but notice that energy. And notice when a person is depressed, there is the darker colors, right, that they colored, that they're not feeling much in their body. So one of the things that we're hoping to happen, for example, look at happiness. There's not the energy of anger, but there's certainly a sense of there's an activation. And if I ask the person, what are you noticing on the inside? They probably say that they were noticing well-being, because happiness, that emotion of happiness, is usually connected to a sense of well-being. So just remember, every life experience, including our thoughts and feelings, have corresponding sensations in the body. And that's another reason why I've said this before, I'll say it again, that learning to tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being is all what this model is about, because then we have a choice. So tracking is noticing and paying attention to what is happening inside the body. So if you call up again, one of the things, the answers to the questions when we first started, you might want to say, well, what do I notice on the inside? Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And there's sometimes even that a positive resource, like my granddaughter, let's say she actually lives in my house with my daughter and son-in-law and my husband and I. If she's gone on a vacation, I might miss her. So I call her up and I might feel a little sad. That doesn't mean that she's still not a resource to me, but just to know that sometimes resources can be a little bit unpleasant, but she's still more of a resource than she is, and sensing pleasant sensations and unpleasant ones. But when we sense a pleasant or neutral sensation, then we want to stay and sit with that sensation and just be curious about, oh, I can have that experience of sensing something pleasant on the inside or even neutral. So here's a number of sensation words. And I have to say, taught this to many people around the world. And some people are just more sensory aware, and others need to take a little bit more time to learn about how to cultivate sensory words and even to notice, oh, I don't usually notice my body. But when we start to do that, we can start to notice that we're feeling a little bit better. And I often say this to people, that one of the important things about learning sensation words and beginning to focus on that is that we have something that's called interception awareness, and that's our ability to pay attention to body sensations. And so, for example, if you live in a climate, let's say that has snow, and you forgot that it was snowing outside, and you walk outside in a t-shirt and go, oh, I'm cold. You are actually sensing a temperature, cold. And then that causes an action. The action would be, I'm going to go inside and put a coat on. So you're already sensing in your body. So what we're really inviting you to do is bring more attention to sensations, because what the research is finding is that people that have greater interoceptive awareness or greater tracking skills and cultivate that have better control of their emotions and also better impulse control. So there's an important reason for all of us why it would be very important to pay attention to sensations. Now, as I say that, sometimes if a person has had a lot of trauma, even noticing a pleasant sensation can feel unusual and can quickly go into a distressing one. Now, it doesn't mean that they'll never be able to learn how to track their pleasant or neutral sensations, but it can be a little bit harder for them in the beginning. So they may not want to start learning the skills until they think about them a little bit more. Okay, so the next one is resourcing. That's the second skill. And I often say the best way to teach tracking is through a resource. And so if you look at this picture, there's a group of people around a table. And if you see what could be resourceful for them. So people have told me, oh, they're eating pizza. Oh, look at it looks like they have some coffee. They're laughing. They're in a room that looks well lit. It looks like it's a comfortable temperature. During the height of COVID, people say, oh, and they don't have masks on, which means that maybe COVID is over. So there's a number of resources within this picture. So resources can be anything, a person, place, a thing, a memory, a part of yourself that makes you feel calm, pleasant, peaceful, strong, or resilient. This little girl is my granddaughter that I've already talked to you about. Here we have, it can be real or imagined. So maybe there's a stuffed animal that's been a special part of you. My granddaughter has a pillowcase that she is so attached to. It's definitely a resource that she can't go anywhere without that pillowcase. And I know for my daughter, she had a blanket. But there's also beautiful places in nature. I was just in Ireland, and this is a picture of the causeway in Northern Ireland. And then, of course, there could be good friends that you just are in relationship with, and you smile and you talk together, and they're a person that you think of that when you want to go talk to someone, here's someone who's a resource for me. So with resourcing, I want you to think about it for just a second. And it can have a smell, a sight, a touch, a taste, a sound. It can be music, places, people, traditions. Cultural traditions can be huge resources for all of us. But think about one of your resources right now and just describe it to yourself for just a moment. As you think about that resource and the details around it, we call that resource intensification. What happens on the inside? What do you notice about your breathing, your muscles, your heart rate? I'm going to remember my granddaughter again. Oh, my muscles just relaxed here. I can feel my shoulders dropping. And that deeper breath just came in. So I'm going to invite you to do the same thing and just notice for just a few moments those sensations that are pleasant or neutral. And if for any reason you're doing the exercise and it's not pleasant, just look around the room, look at the colors, maybe touch the table of where you're sitting, or your chair, sofa, or bed, and just try to come back to my voice if for any reason it's not pleasant. But as someone once said to me, once she started thinking about her resource, the first one, then all of a sudden there was a cascade of other resources that she began to know about. And that when she started talking to friends and family members about the resources, she felt that there was a contagion of well-being, not a contagion that's causing harm, but actually a collective way of coming together with this embodied familial or community sense of well-being. So the next skill is called grounding. And many of you have known about grounding. You may have had other courses where you've learned about that. And for us, our definition is simple. It's the direct contact of the body or part of the body with something that provides support in the present moment. It also gives us something that's called gravitational security, which is the foundation upon which we build our interpersonal relationships. And sometimes there's some of us that maybe we've had a lot of trauma. We may feel like we're always spinning or our feet don't even touch the floor. We may feel a little bit floaty. So if that relationship is not safer in terms of our sense of ourself in the present moment, sometimes it's hard to even engage with others. And also, if we're not grounded, we're often thinking about the future or the past. We're not in that present moment. So grounding helps us come to present moment awareness. But another thing that I've learned is that some people hate grounding in a chair. So look at all the different ways you can ground. You can lay down. I learned in the Philippines that Filipinos ground in the water as the buoyancy of the water is supporting them. Walking, paying attention to steps as you're taking those steps. I often ground through my hand when I'm sitting at my desk, and let's say I'm getting distressed. I push my hand against, I can feel the temperature. It's cool. I can feel that it's hard. Again, I'm naming the sensations, and I can feel myself coming back into balance. It can be standing against a wall. I know many people I've known many veterans of wars and law enforcement that often feel safer when they know a wall is behind them so they can see the perimeter. So in that way they can ground. And also there's those of us that can be sitting in a chair and ground and feel very comfortable as we're grounding through sitting in a chair.
can't see this on procedure.
So the next thing, that beautiful granddaughter I was just talking about has just come in for a second. So I want to talk to you. She just came in to get the dog because the dog is one of her resources. So some children and adults who experience physical and emotional trauma may have difficulty with the skill of grounding. So just know that for some people, bringing their attention to their body without an image like a resource, which is why we teach resourcing with tracking first, can be difficult. So the next skill, I'm not going to be able to teach you all skills, but I wanted to mention the help now strategies. Because in today's world, this is one of the most important skills people tell me help them and help children. And if you're way out of your zone, stuck in the high or low zone, you can do some very simple things. And many of you already do this. You've already practiced this. You can drink a glass of water. You can count backward from 20 as you walk around the room, or just sit in a chair. You can name 6 colors. You can pay attention to anything that catches your eye. You can notice the temperature and the space you're in. You can touch the surface like I just shared with you. If you're outside or inside, you can go around and touch different things and notice the texture. One of the things that I've noticed that really is helpful is sometimes when people push very hard against a wall, or sometimes if you push your hands against another person and almost go back and forth with each other, that can help release some of the tension in the body. Or you can lean against a wall and really push your body and your legs against the wall. And that also can help you come back into your resilient zone. So we call those the help now strategies. And you'll see on the iChill app, it's in the corner where you can just push that button because it has a voice saying the help now strategies, whether you speak English, Spanish, or Ukrainian. So as I'm coming to a close with this introduction to the model, I want to tell you a little bit about the research. And that is, there was a community-based research that was done in San Bernardino County. And there were 5 groups that represented Latinos, African Americans, LGBTQ, Asian Pacific Islanders, and veterans. And what the participants who participated, they thought that really they learned how to teach the skills to others. It was a teacher training class. And this was sustained at 3 and 6 months follow-up, with 93% reported a daily use of the skills. And so the pre and post comparison analysis showed a significant decrease in distress indicators and increase in well-being indicators. So the conclusion of the authors, and I have to self-admit I was one, CRIM's high usability holds promise for a broader, low-cost and sustainable implementation in traumatized and under-resourced communities. This one, which was published in 2020 by Dr. Lindy Grabby and her team at Emory University, was a 3-hour course where all the skills, like this has been about an hour, there were nurses, this was pre-COVID, and they wanted to determine if the CRIM skills would help improve well-being and whether it would reduce secondary traumatic stress and burnout. That the nurses had a high rate of PTSD and also symptoms of burnout. And so there were 2 groups. One was given a nutrition class and the other was given the CRIM class. And there was a moderate to large effect size were demonstrated in the CRIM group for improved well-being, resiliency, secondary traumatic stress, and improvement in physical symptoms, because a lot of the nurses complained about somatic symptoms. So they reported using CRIM techniques for self-stabilization during stressful work events, which was so interesting. The kinds of things that they said were, I use it during a code. I use it when I'm dealing with a stressful situation with a family. I use it if there's any kind of conflict, and they even were talking about using it for themselves. But some of it was like we talk about sensations. Some of them talked about they would touch their wedding ring and just move it back and forth, or do a gesture that was about their well-being, which is one of the skills that I didn't go to in great detail. But they were able to use these into the activities of the living of being a nurse. And so what to me also was profound about this study is that there was an 80% improvement in well-being when they did the year follow-up. There was only 60%, I think, at 6 months. And it showed that the nurses continued to use the skills, and it continued to expand. And they've done some additional studies with nurses post-COVID getting similar results. But there was also a study that was done with women who were from a treatment center. They were given a 5-hour crim course, and that the participants also, the same sort of things, is that their somatic complaints, anger, and anxiety symptoms declined significantly, and with their well-being also increased. Now, it was a smaller effect size, but what's interesting to the researchers is that the women in the home started teaching the skills to others, so they became crim guides very quickly. So there's lots more research that you can learn about our model at traumaresourceinstitute.com, but there's lots of research underway at different universities, and this is just a fraction. Every time I turn around, there's another university or another person researching the model, so we're very excited about that expanded research. So the book that I wrote that's all about the model that I just presented and more is called Building Resilience to Trauma, to the Trauma and Community Resiliency Models. The second edition will be published in January of 2023, but it was selected by the United Nations, Ann Taylor and Francis, as one of the books that demonstrates the support to the United Nations call to end poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and protect the planet. The other thing about the community resiliency model, and I named 4 of them here, but there's many more, that we have collaborations, and these skills can be integrated. They don't have to be a standalone intervention. They've been integrated into the C learning program at Emory University, the Compassion and Integrity training, the International Transformation and Resilience Coalition, which is a climate change group, and the Christopher Wolf Crusade that is launching an amazing project to try to deal with the opioid addiction that was started by Cammie Wolf Rice in dedication of her son who died from an opioid overdose. So we're working in many different avenues around the world. Of course, I've told you about the Ukrainians, and that's the recent one, and we continue to have an ongoing relationship with them. And that probably has been one of the most sacred projects that I've been involved with, and I have been so fortunate to travel the world to bring this model to so many different places. So you can connect with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, also on our website. You can send us messages. We so far are in about, I think it's about 75 different countries, but growing, and 41 states. And that means there's people that have taken our model either to an organization, they've learned it themselves. And we have teacher training programs where you yourself could become a teacher of the community resiliency model. And we offer them monthly, and we are since Zoom and since COVID-19, it's been, the silver lining in this great tragedy of the life is that many people have been taking our trainings from around the world. And so in ending, I just say a couple things is our Trauma Resource Institute believes in our common humanity in a world where people of all religions, races, abilities, ages, sexual orientation, and gender identification are equally respected, included, and welcomed. And also, I have learned that when we bring awareness to the inner wisdom of our bodies, well-being can grow even in times of great suffering. Moments of gratitude can be seen and sensed. So I welcome you all to visit our website. It's been my joy to spend this time with you. Again, go to traumaresourceinstitute.com to learn more about our work. And thank you for being here with me today.